After thousands of years of philosophers, scientists, and therapists arguing about why we dream, a Stanford neuroscientist thinks he's cracked it. The answer has nothing to do with processing emotions, replaying memories, or anything Freud said. The real answer is about territory, and it's one of the most elegant ideas I've come across about how the brain works. But here's the thing. That's not actually what got me about this interview. There's something else he says, a specific claim about what happens when you get really good at something, that directly contradicts most of the productivity advice that's out there. And it's the thing I keep coming back to. Stay with me, I'll get to it. First, why do we dream? Dr. David Eagleman is a neuroscientist at Stanford. He spent decades studying brain plasticity, perception, and what he calls the machinery of reality, how the brain constructs the world you experience rather than just receiving it passively. His answer to the dream question came from a simple observation. We live on a planet that rotates into darkness every 24 hours. Half your life, there's no light coming in through your eyes. And the brain, it turns out, has a problem with that. Here's the problem. The visual cortex, the part of your brain that processes what you see, is valuable real estate. And like all real estate, if it goes unused, something else moves in. In people who go blind, the visual cortex doesn't just sit idle. Within months, it starts getting used for hearing, for touch, for other senses. Harvard researchers tested this with normally sighted people. They blindfolded them for 60 minutes, just an hour, and they could already see the takeover beginning. The visual cortex starting to respond to sound and touch. So here's the question the brain faces every single night. You're going dark for 6 to 8 hours. How do you stop your visual cortex from being colonized while you sleep? The answer is dreaming. Every 90 minutes, an ancient part of your midbrain blasts random activity into the visual system. It's not meaningful. It's not therapeutic. It's defensive. It's your brain saying, this territory is occupied. The other senses can't have it. That's why your eyes dart back and forth during REM sleep. That's why infants spend half their sleep time dreaming, because their brains are maximally plastic and need the most defending. And that's why most dreams are bizarre and forgettable. They're not supposed to mean anything. They're maintenance. Most dreams are the brain's screensaver, running only to stop the screen from going dark. Here's the part that got me. Eagleman makes an argument early in this interview that I think most self-improvement content misses entirely. He says the reason we're inconsistent, the reason we make bad decisions, break our own rules, regret things, is not weakness. It's architecture. You are not one person. You are a team of rivals. Inside your skull, you have about 86 billion neurons. They're not all pulling in the same direction. They're organized into competing networks that want different things. And the version of you making a decision at midnight on a Friday is not the same version of you that made rules at 7 a.m. on Monday. He calls this the neural parliament. Every decision is a vote, and different parties are in charge at different times depending on your environment, your mood, your energy, what you've eaten, who you're with. This isn't a character flaw, it's how you're built. But knowing you're dealing with a parliament means you can start managing it properly. Eagleman talks about something called the Ulysses contract. It comes from the Greek myth where Ulysses ordered his crew to tie him to the mast and ignore him before sailing past the sirens, because he knew that future Ulysses, hearing that music, couldn't be trusted. The practical version, the best thing you can do for your future self is constrain them before they're in the situation, not by willpower, by architecture. The classic example is Alcoholics Anonymous. The first thing they tell you to do is get every bottle out of your house, not because you'll definitely drink tonight, but because at some point, on a festive Saturday or a lonely Sunday, a different parliament will be in session, and that parliament will find a way to justify it. You think this is about addiction. It's not. It's about anyone who's ever said they'd go to the gym tomorrow and then tomorrow came. The version of you who made that commitment is not the version of you who snoozes the alarm. Stop designing your life for your best self. Design it for your worst one. This is the one worth knowing. There's a study that's been running for decades. Researchers at a university tracked a group of Catholic nuns who agreed to donate their brains for autopsy when they died. When the researchers examined the brains, they found something strange. Some of these nuns had the physical markers of Alzheimer's disease. Their brain tissue was degenerating exactly as you'd expect in a late-stage patient. But when they were alive, they showed none of the cognitive symptoms. No memory problems, no confusion. They were sharp to the end. Why? Because they lived in convents until the day they died. They had responsibilities, social friction with the other sisters, arguments, games, chores. They were always doing something, always interacting, always building. What Eagleman calls cognitive reserve, the brain's ability to compensate by building new pathways, even as old ones deteriorate. The tissue was failing. The roadways weren't. Brain degeneration isn't a switch that flips. It's a race. One side, tissue is degrading. That happens to everyone, accelerated by disease. Other side, you're building new connections when you stay engaged, challenged, social. Which side wins depends on how much you've built going in. Here's the claim that contradicts most productivity advice. Eagleman says, once you've mastered something, drop it. Not tweak it, not level it up. Drop it entirely. Pick up something you're genuinely bad at and start over. The reason is neurological. When you're learning something new, when you're in that uncomfortable zone of frustrating but achievable, the brain is forced to build new structure, new roadways. That's when change happens. When you've mastered something, you're running on existing infrastructure. The brain has a model, the model works, there's no pressure to build new paths. You're maintaining, not growing. So the advice to double down on your strengths, optimize your system, stick to your routine, that's fine for output. It's bad for your brain. Not because routine is wrong, but because mastery without new challenge is how you stagnate neurologically. The nuns who stayed sharp weren't the ones who got really good at one thing. They were the ones who kept getting themselves into situations they didn't fully understand. Most people miss this. They retire from challenge once they've achieved something. They stop putting themselves in the frustrating but achievable zone. Your brain needs to be a beginner at something. Consistently. One more thing from this interview, and I think this is one of the sharper takes I've heard on using AI as a thinking tool. Eagleman is a cyber optimist. He thinks kids growing up with the internet are going to be smarter than any generation before, because they have access to just-in-time knowledge instead of just-in-case knowledge. When you're genuinely curious and you get an answer immediately, that sticks. It has a chemical signature in your brain that rote learning doesn't. But the interesting bit is what he says about using AI to stress test your thinking. His version: take something you believe strongly, a memo you wrote, a decision you've made, a plan you're proud of, and ask your AI to tell you, as brutally as it can, where you're wrong. Not to validate the thing, to break it. Here's why it works. You don't feel socially threatened by an AI. When a person tells you your idea has a fatal flaw, your identity is involved. You defend. Your brain treats social threat the same way it treats physical threat: fight or flight. When an AI says it, the reflex doesn't kick the same way. You can actually update. He called it the private conversation that gives you the honest feedback you'd never get from a room. My take: this is the most underused thing in AI right now. People use it to confirm their thinking. They should be using it to break it. Eagleman ended the interview with something simple. Someone asked him what the most important thing he hadn't talked about was. He said, learn the skills of dialogue, eye contact, conversation, listening to understand how someone else's internal model works. Not to agree with them, just to understand. Because the social circuitry in your brain, the part that keeps you seeing other people as people, needs use to stay active. It degenerates when you stop exercising it. And in a world that keeps making it easier to interact with screens and harder to sit with disagreement, that's a real risk. The interview is worth your time. Not for the dreams section, though that's genuinely fascinating. For the parts about how you're built and what that means for how you should be running your life. That's the idea. Make of it what you will.